From the heart of Silicon Valley in the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area, I am Sudipto Chatterjee and this is Economically Speaking with Atanu De. On Economically Speaking, we talk about economic topics and how they affect our world. Hello Atanu, how are you doing?
Well, Sudipto, I'm doing well. Actually, I'm sitting here in a corporate park in Mumbai and talking to you over the internet. So it's quite interesting technology we have here.
Yes, the wonders of technology. You know, we were talking about technology during our last week's podcast episode, and it got me thinking. The internet did not happen on day zero, right? It's a culmination of a set of technologies. It has evolved from a certain point of some guy in the Stone Age actually striking two pieces of stone together to create a fire to where the internet is now, to where we will eventually be, I don't know, 100 years from now, hopefully, if mankind is still around. How does this evolve? What is the process?
The process is interesting in the sense that it is a multiplicative process. You have some ideas that lead to more ideas. Ideas get combined in certain ways, and that creates more novel ideas. So ideas are at the foundation or the basic building block of whatever we see around us. That is, a tree growing doesn't involve any ideas that has to be there. The nature takes care of that. But everything that humans do involve ideas. So in the Stone Age, the idea was that if you find this kind of a stone, this is called flint, and you strike it just this way, then you can get a sharp edge and you can make a spear out of it, or a tool for skinning an animal. So all these are ideas, and ideas occur to people. So as more people create ideas and more people then kind of mash them up into more ideas, so the ideas keep growing. Ideas are different from the stuff that we can hold in our hands and so on. Ideas are abstract things that which multiply. They are what we call, the word we would use in this case is non-rival. They are not rivalrous. It doesn't diminish if more people use it. Let's say this. If you come into the room with 3 oranges and I come into the room with 5 apples, the number of apples and oranges is constant. We can exchange apples and oranges, but the total number of apples and oranges is the same. Now, suppose you have 2 ideas and come into the room and I have 2 ideas and we share the ideas, then each of us has 4 ideas now. Do you see the distinction between ideas and other stuff that you can hold in your hand?
Yes, and it applies basically to anything non-tangible, so to say.
Yes, that is in things that are information related, that information is non-rival. That is, you get to have the information and I can also get the same information. It doesn't reduce the amount of information that you have if I get the same information. You can copy things. It's like if you listen to a song, I can also listen to the song at the same time. If I have a copy of the song or a copy of the software. So all these are different kinds of goods than, say, the stuff that we can hold in our hand, a table or a car or an apple. These are 2 different kinds of goods. So ideas are what we would call, let's say, call them information goods. And ideas build upon ideas. So you know how to do something, and that is know-how, and which we have in the last episode we called technology. And if I have some technology, I can give it to another person. That is, I can tell them how to do something. So like we use the example of a cake recipe is technology. And when ideas get incorporated or embodied in things, that is the technological artifact or the good that we hold in our hands, like a smartphone.
Okay, so when we are talking of technology or ideas embodied through objects that we can use to create further ideas or create new channels, so to say, channels of, I don't know how to phrase it.
Okay, go ahead.
Create new technology,
Yeah.
then that directly affects productivity of humans or people, and by extension nations, in a way,
Yeah.
because that's the whole idea behind a startup. Somebody comes up with an idea, executes it, and it ends up benefiting everybody around him in the society, him or her.
Yes. So what happens is, when we create something that is of value, of use to other people, we are increasing the amount of goods and services that is available for consumption. So it makes our lives easier in some sense. So therefore, the more production there is, the more possibilities of satisfying the needs of the people. So suppose you had, let's go back a little bit and say that at some point agriculture was invented. That is, the technology, agricultural technology was invented. That what you can do is plant seeds and it grows into crops, and then you take the crops and then you take out this, keep some seeds aside for next year's crop, but we can eat the rest of the things. So you know how to do things. So agriculture was what employed a lot of people. Then when the productivity of agriculture increased, what does productivity mean? It means with the same amount of input, you get more production, or with lower amounts of input, you still get the same amount of production. So when, let's say, 100% of the people were engaged in agriculture, that is producing the food that the people needed to eat, there didn't it didn't leave a lot of other people to do the other things that needed to be done. But when agricultural productivity increased, what happens is that the number of people needed to produce the food that we need goes down, and therefore it releases some people to do things other than agriculture.
That's very interesting, because those are the people who can now find new utilities of stuff that are lying around and create wealth, so to say.
Yeah. So if you have a lot of people doing agriculture, then you have fewer people doing the non-agricultural stuff. And as economies progress, the more advanced an economy is, the fewer people are employed in agriculture. Say, 100 years ago, the United States was not as rich a country as it is today. At that time, say 50% of the people of the United States were engaged in agriculture and related activities, the production and distribution of food. Now, approximately 2% of the American population is engaged in agriculture and related activities, which means 2% of the people produce enough food for the rest of the entire population. In poor countries, let's take a country like India, most of the people, something like 50% of the labor, that is, people are engaged in agriculture. And therefore, only 50% remaining are there to do other things, like producing other things that we need, clothes and shoes and dentistry and education. You see, what happens is, the more people who are engaged in agriculture, which is actually the most important sector in some sense. If you don't have a very highly productive agricultural sector, you will not be able to do the other things that need to be done, because they are all engaged in agriculture. It's only when agriculture becomes so productive that it releases so many people. Only 2% in the United States case need to work in agriculture. The rest can do other things.
Okay, and even if United States, let's say, doesn't produce enough pumpkins, then other people in the economy are productive enough that the country as a whole can buy or import enough amount of pumpkins and still maintain a state of growth. Is
Quite
that
right.
a statement?
That is what we are saying. What you're saying here is that agriculture is important and we need to produce enough to sustain everybody in the economy. But if there is some item that is not produced in the economy, then you can trade with some other economy and get the things that you need in exchange. So, for example, you could say that the United States doesn't have to manufacture cars. Imagine there's a not the United States. Let's take a hypothetical country which does not have to manufacture cars, but what they have is they manufacture corn, say. So they make a lot of corn, and then they take the corn, and there is this big building in which they put the corn in one end of the building, and at the other end of the building come out cars. So it transforms corn into cars. Now you'd say this is a kind of a miracle, isn't it? You're putting corn at one end of the building, and the other end of the building cars come out,
Yes.
right? But behind the screen, this is what's happening. The corn goes and it gets put into shipping containers. And the shipping containers are put in a ship and they are sent off to some country where they use the corn, let's say for feed. And in the same shipping containers, they put cars that they have manufactured and send it back. So the same building, now you see cars coming out the other end. At one end you put corn, the other end cars come out. So trade transforms corn into cars.
What an interesting insight. So, coming back to a country like India, when we say that farmers are not as productive as some other countries like in the US, what we could do is, if we have, instead of 50%, just 30% of the population of India working at a much higher level of productivity with enough revenue to be able to sustain themselves, that's a much happier state of being than 50% of the population working on agriculture to feed the rest of the country.
So ultimately what we have to understand is that if agricultural productivity increases significantly, then what it does is the country has the possibility of becoming more wealthy, that is, more production is possible. And there are reasons why agriculture, if it becomes very productive, then manufacturing can then be can grow within the economy. And if there is more manufacturing happening, then manufacturing produces all the non-agricultural stuff that we need, including the tools that are required to make agriculture more productive.
So doesn't that create sort of a weird catch-22 situation? Like you have people who are producing things, and then until you have enough people freed up from agriculture to be able to produce those goods, you cannot go back and reduce the number of people who are working on agriculture in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. So what we have to do is to make agriculture more productive, you need more tools. That is, the technology has to be there to make agriculture more productive. So like if you don't have the tools like a combine harvester, which does the equivalent work of say 2,000 people, and there's one person who can actually drive the combine harvester and do the harvesting by just one person. So that releases a lot of labor. And the important thing is, in some cases, it might be that agriculture is not very suitable for a certain country because agriculture requires a lot of land, fertile land, and water. And if a country doesn't have that, then they should go into what they are more capable of producing. And therefore, what we'll do is we need to understand a concept called comparative advantage. And this thing is something which is at the core of all trade. Remember, in the past episode, we had talked about trade and why trade is important, and it makes exchange and trade is important because it increases the amount of goods that we have at our disposal, the variety and the amount. And that is this whole trade and exchange is based upon this idea called comparative advantage is at the core of an economy, and we will talk about it the next time.
Yes, that sounds like a very interesting topic to go into for our next episode. Thank you very much for your time, Atanu. Hope you have a lovely day in Mumbai.
Chatting with you, Sudipta, and you keep in touch. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you again for listening to this very new podcast of ours. If you liked this episode, you should subscribe to the podcast. You can leave us comments on our Facebook page at facebook.com/economically speaking. Or you can join the discussion at Twitter by following us. Our Twitter handle is @econspeaking. Each week, we chat with Atanu De on matters generally related to economics. This is Economically Speaking with your host Sudipta Chatterjee. Until next time, goodbye.